Well, I'm happy to say I've managed to track down a very old and dear friend, Stan Standish-White, a member of a great Rhodesian family, and somebody with a family story that really, in many ways, tells the story of Rhodesia. So, well, welcome, Stan, and I want you to tell us how the family ended up north of the Limpopo.
Okay, Hannes. Yeah, my great-grandfather, John Dunlop, was a jock. I can't remember whereabouts in Scotland he came from, but he saw opportunities in the late 1800s in Rhodesia, and then after the pioneer column, he got himself to Durban, and the family story goes, I'm not quite sure what the truth was, he decided to get up to Zim on foot because there was a lot of horse sickness around, and he didn't want to plan a whole operation on horses. And then the horses all died, and he was left in the middle with nothing. Anyway, so he walked all the way to Salisbury back in 1891 or something. And yeah, so that was one branch of the family that started off there from the beginning of colonization. And then the other side of the family, my granddad, came out from Trinity College as a young doctor to work on tropical diseases in Livingston, northern Rhodesia. That was 1910 or 11, I think. So he was there from then. And then the First World War came along, and they needed to send guys up to German East Africa, now Tanzania. And Granddad was roped into the Northern Rhodesia Medical Corps. So he spent about 2 years running after Colonel von Lette Vorbeck. They couldn't catch him, but they chased him out. And then he was sent off to the Western Front for the end of the war. During that process, he'd met my gran, and Europe was in a bit of a mess, as you can imagine. So he came back to Southern Africa and settled in Bulawayo.
Stan, I know, the one uncle I knew best was Uncle Mike, because him and my dad worked together in the medical world. But just tell us about the three brothers. Your dad went farming, Mike was the doctor, and the third brother?
Dennis was the oldest. He was the brightest and the least martial of the three brothers. But he ended up joining the Royal Engineers in the Second World War. They were busy in Greece. And he, against all expectations, did very well there, just because he was so organized and, gutsy. Dad's story is he got the MC on Tuesday and got a bullet in the neck on Friday. It was a busy week. So
that's when he was put up against a wall, wasn't he? What?
I'm not sure of the true circumstances. He was yeah. Anyway, so that was his war over, and he took about 6 months in a plaster cast to come right. But he...
Tell us what happened. They were captured, they were put before a firing squad.
Yeah, as I say, I don't know the details, because my dad had various versions of the story, like a good Irishman. I think Dennis's kids have a more accurate version, but I'm not quite sure. I won't commit myself to the truth, but there was definitely, I think, an attempted execution, and somehow he got out with this dreadful wound. They thought he was dead.
Mike was too young.
Yeah, Mike was training as a pilot at the flying school in Bulawayo, and I think he finished that training, but by that stage they'd wrapped up in North Africa, and they changed the whole thing and then said if they wanted to join the RAF they could, or otherwise go back to wherever they came from. And my grandfolks, who'd already had one son dreadfully wounded, said, you will go back to school. So he went back to school and subsequently became a very effective and well-known orthopedic surgeon. And like his father before him, his contribution to the Rhodesian War was working on all the forces for nothing.
Yes.
So his story is, he's cut bits off most of Zimbabwe.
Yes. He did amazing work on a lot of guys who were wounded. Mike put them back together again and did it.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, the thing was, after sanctions, it applied on all sorts of levels, not just economic and commerce. The doctors didn't have bright young things coming through, doing locums and bringing fresh ideas. So the old guard, they had to make their own plan for everything. And they made a lot of plans, which worked very, very well.
And Stan, and your dad went farming. He
Yeah.
went near Sonoya.
Well, we started off in Banket, and then after UDI, the small crop farmers took a bit of strain, so he decided it was time to go into cattle farming. So then we got a big ranch near Chinoi.
And school, you went to Peterhouse.
Yeah, the folks were desperately trying to turn us into officers and gentlemen. So we were shipped off the other side of the country to a school where we were supposed to learn to say "air It sort of worked with my brother, but not with me, unfortunately. Anyway, I got sort of reasonably good A-levels and went from there.
And just a bit about life on the farm as the war escalated and life became more uncomfortable.
Yeah, the last 2 or 3 years of the war, the Gooks had infiltrated all sorts of places, right into the middle, into Harare and the country districts, which had been previously relatively safe, became hectic. In the last year, 79, we had a landmine in our driveway, which fortunately the military vehicle that used to check up on the roads set off rather than any of my parents' vehicles, which have been turned into tin cans. And then a couple of months after that, Dad and his assistant were ambushed on the bottom of our farm. Again, fortunately, they came out of it. They found a lot of blood spore, but they didn't find any casualties in the bush. But that was all I was serving at the time. So you call it exciting. It wasn't really exciting. I mean, you can imagine my mum sitting at the house listening to this blooming war going on down at the end of the farm, wondering now what to do. Anyway, then during that time as well, our neighbors, the old Fordyces, I mean, they were in their 70s, I think, were brutally murdered. My buddy Yoppie was on the same road down there, and he went to see them. And I mean, they had their eyes gouged out and whatever. So I knew the enemy I was up against. It made me sure that we were doing the right thing.
I'm sure. Stan, so how did you end up your journey to the military after school?
Well, they denied us the option, I think in about 75, to try anything else before going to the army. So you were allowed to repeat your exams once if you flunked, and then it was off to national service. So we all trooped off to national service, and I'd been pretty fascinated by the military since an early age, playing with my dad's lead soldiers and listening to all the war stories. And as the war got more hectic around us, it was something that had to be sorted. And I'd always been keen on the idea of special forces. So then when we all were herded into Llewellyn, and a chap came down from Cranbourne and said, okay, who wants to be in the SAS? And of course we were all hands up, yeah, and he just smiled slowly and said, okay, come outside. They only had room for 70 on the recruit course, and there were about 210 of us that wanted to be special force colonels and winners of the Victoria Cross. Anyway, so after a couple of hours, they had us down to 70 and put us on the train to Cranbourne. And that's where the SAS saga started.
And who were your instructors?
We had Captain Johnson, we called him CJ. He was training troop senior officer. And then Johnny Masson was a senior NCO with his traditional voice. There was Mike Kruger, Nick Breitenbach, all old soldiers. I mean, that really made the difference for us, because not only did they know their shit, but there was a vested interest. If any of us had to go to the bush, then we were the product of their training. and it was excellent and brutal.
Where did you do your selection?
Our selection was in Metopus. Yeah, they used to do it in Marandellas, in Yanga, and then it was moved down to Metopus. So we did our second phase up at Guai River Mine, and then from there we trucked down to Bulawayo, and we did what they call first phase and second phase. First phase was just wearing the guys out, no sleep, exercise, very little water, no food, and they thinned the ranks out a bit like that. And then whoever made it through first phase, we trucked off to the bush and did point to point and log marches and speed marches and all that sort of stuff.
So out of your course, how many actually passed out at the end?
Well, the 70 that we started with, I think we were probably, well, I mean, do you count the 210 that started at Llewellyn or what? No, but the recruit course was 70-ish, and I think nearly 20 passed out. And then we had another couple of guys who actually did better than us because they were so unfit, relatively speaking, was the short course guys from other units. They came with us for 2 weeks and got trotted around Guai River Mine, and then, okay, so here comes selection. And those guys, they really had a hard time because we were all fit as fiddles. I mean, we'd been running everywhere for 20 weeks, doing pull-ups for fun and press-ups every time you got something wrong in class, really.
So from there on to, you did your para course?
Yeah, we had a weekend off to heal the blisters, and then because we had a tiny para school at New Serum, we had an agreement with the SADF to take the overflow, and we were the overflow at that stage. So we went and joined a course in Bloem. Tempe Barracks, yeah. Which is the headquarters of 44 Brigade. Although I'm not sure whether it was a brigade already by then. Around about that time, it became a brigade rather than just 3 regiments.
And then, Stan, what squadron were you posted to?
I ended up in C, and everyone says no, but that was the name of the unit. What happened was, the last year of the war, I think end of 78 or beginning of 79, the squadron became a regiment with 3 squadrons in it instead of just a squadron with 2 troops. And I was allocated to C, which was made up of new guys, which was quite interesting for us. I mean, there were old guard in B troop that became B squadron, and the same for A. But then obviously they had to populate C with some of the old guys. And it was all new and fresh and lekker. We loved it.
And your OC was?
Captain Pierce, the late.
Okay, Stan, talk us through your first op. I think it was Op Snoopy.
Well, yeah, that was the first op of interest. We'd done some work north of the lake, just OPing and watching movement and stuff, but it was very low-key, no casualties, and then we came back and we'd learnt a lot as new boys. All sorts of little things you learn. I mean, nothing to do with how to take people out at 400 meters into the setting sun. Just little survival skills, that made you more effective, more comfortable, and improved your chances of survival. But the first big one was Op Snoopy. That was the old Chimoyo base, just over the border from Mtali. I wasn't actually included in the operation itself. I was taken along as what they call a juice jockey, because we had been doing a drill and weapons course at the time, and they needed troops on the ground at their admin base, which was a setup they had next to the operational area, so that the choppers didn't have that far to go to take casualties or get more ammo or water, that sort of thing. Anyway, and we were just employed to, a perimeter guard, and also to help roll drums and all the sort of admin and handy work that had to be done there. Anyway, a lot of guys suffered from heat fatigue, and 3 or 4 of them were casevaced out. And I was pulled into one of their slots, so it became part of the operation.
And tell us about the actual engagement. There was a blue on blue incident, if I remember correctly.
The first day I missed because I was juice jockeying, And then they didn't get nearly as many CAS as they were expecting. I think either the approach had been too slow, or because, well, I named Shirley, but the scouts did a lot of our OP work, and they took incredible risks, and they got this incredible information. And it must have been very frustrating for them to see it all going pear-shaped for, whatever of a number of reasons. Anyway, we had a lot of punch-ups there, but it didn't go according to plan. And we were sweeping through the bush on the third day, probably. And we had a whole bunch of hostiles in front of us. And we called in an airstrike. But there were two ridges that looked identical. And the Brule Cream boys fly on photographs, not on 150s, which we used. So, unfortunately, the pilos got the wrong ridge, and they dumped on top of us instead of the one in front of us where the baddies were. And this big bomb came in amongst us. We were trying to work out whether the Gooks had 120mm mortars or what the hell was going on. Because that shell shock is a real thing. You're disorientated, and there's leaves and dust and shit all over the place. Anyway, the Twice, who was our stick leader, was exceptionally quick off the mark, and he realized that they always came in twos. He managed to get the second aircraft to roll out, otherwise the second bomb would have come in amongst us as well. As it was, Steve Donnelly got a big piece through the back that came right through his pelvis and all the big veins and everything. He was about 8 or 10 meters away from me. And then on the other side was Kiwi Campion, who got a piece in his leg. So actually, we got off quite lightly, but Steve didn't make it. He bled out, I think.
Stan, the South Africans were involved in that as well, weren't they? Wasn't there a South African attachment?
Yeah, we had what they called, not officially, D Squadron guys, the one Ricky guys with us. And in the sweep line that afternoon, I think, the same afternoon that we'd been bombed, we had incoming from the front, and the one Ricky guy was shot in the throat. Yeah, so they worked with us quite a bit, but especially down on the Russian front. They like to work on their own, but we had embedded guys occasionally. Different sort of technique. Well, obviously, they didn't have the experience we had, and they were super aggressive. So shoot and scoot was not part of their program. It's like just overrun, eliminate, destroy. I said, guys, tread carefully here. There's only 4 of us, or 8 of us, or something.
Stan, your next, I think your next biggish one was Makushi, which was a part of a 3-pronged attack into Zambia. Just tell us about what you remember of your...
Yeah, the O group details are pretty hazy now, but Makushi was the main target. They'd hit a whole lot of, a big camp, I think it was called Victory Camp, just outside Lusaka in the morning. But that was only airborne with K-cars and everything. I don't think there were ground troops involved in that. So then they came back while we were at Paris School kitting up, and they were all thumbs up, and they'd done great damage. So then we were all keyed up to go to this Makushi place. Funnily enough, a lot of the guys I was at school with came from Makushi. Not sure how many of their families were still there at the time, but we laid on some fireworks for them. We got to Makushi around about just after midday, I think, and just dust and smoke and stuff from all the bombs that had been dropped.
What a sick guys in the plane.
I beg your pardon?
What a sickness in the plane.
Yeah, no, geez, the bucketing around all the way from New Serum up to blooming that far north of the Zambezi. It was a long flight and hot and uncomfortable. You're all strapped up with all your kit and and one guy lets go, and then it's sort of like domino principle. It was ugly, especially when you have to get out the aircraft and you're slipping all. Anyway, moving swiftly on.
So finally, you get out of the plane. What's going on the ground?
Well, you're looking around frantically. It was the first camp attack I'd done, and you're sure the world's going to end because there are a lot of bangs and flashes until you realize that actually none of them were coming in our direction. So we landed okay and formed up the sweep line and carried on towards where the main action was. I wasn't on one of the main sweep lines. Some of the guys there, I mean, they got through hundreds of rounds. And one of the funny discoveries was 90% of the casualties inflicted on the enemy were females. I'm not sure whose idea it had been to involve them in the Hondo, but they were all armed, and one of them killed Collet. So they were no less dangerous or less viable targets.
Were you part of, there was an ambush afterwards, after the dust had settled?
Yeah, I think we were there maybe 3 days, and then it was time to go. And as we were assembling, our ambush group had been north of the camp, and then we joined one of the big sweep lines for uplift, or moving to the uplift area. And we were spread along this crest, just prepping ourselves for moving south to where the LZ was. And here comes a whole patrol of Zambian army in between two gullies. I mean, they didn't have a chance. We're all weaponed up, aggressive as anything, maybe 30 of us, and here come these guys into this gully. Well, I don't know how many of them made it, but single figures. Anyway, I mean, they came to inspect all the noise and excitement and walked slap bang into us, and it was a bad day for them.
There was a white guy amongst them,
I don't know that. Perhaps.
Stan, you spent a bit of time on the Russian front. Everybody's got some memories of time down in Gaza, southern Mozambique.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend down there?
Well, not a lot. You know, all the A Squadron guys says, we always get sent to Mabalahuta, and you guys get all the good jobs up there, blooming, looking at the game in Botswana and all this sort of stuff. I don't know if that was the truth, but I didn't personally spend a lot of time down there in Gaza. I do remember, though, that the wildlife was one of the problems down there. You know, you think you're waiting for not only gooks but freds. They became fully hostile and looking for us all the time. But, you know, now you've got buffalo snorting around in the middle of the night, and you have to keep your bearings, and you hear some elephant coming. Oi, oi, oi. Anyway, we had a lot of what we termed tactical withdrawal at speed.
Stan, now we're off to Lusaka to kill the fat man. Tell us about how that all started and how you...
Yeah, we were lucky to be allocated. You know, I don't know how the command group of squadron allocated tasks, but we got this one, C Squadron that is, to go and visit Josh in Como in his house in the middle of Lusaka. And they said, how are we going to do this? Are we going to drive up there? Just drive up there? And they said, no, but your jeeps are going to look just like Zambian army, and you'll look just like Zambian army. We said, okay. And the Twice and a group of his came with us as well, with I think a scout, the African serviceman that came with us. So at least we had one real native face, because, you know, black is beautiful, it works at a distance, but as soon as you close up, you know, you can see it's a guy with black is beautiful on, not whoever he's pretending to be. And I remember, I mean, I was on one of the vehicles, and we'd been through thick Jesse and rough country to get onto the roads, and my shirt was torn all down one side, and there's this flash of pink skin, you see. So, I mean, anyone driving up behind us would have said, what? Anyway, somehow or other, we made it all the way to his house. Got the very one. But it was, they had Hessian attached to the fence all the way around, which made seeing from one side to the other pretty difficult. and our vehicle overshot our position slightly, just slightly, because the driver couldn't see exactly where the building finished, which was where we would have had to stop, according to plan A. And the Twice's team was on the other side, and so we were receiving their fire when the thing initiated.
Twice being drones.
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, so they were professionally keeping their fire low, and lucky for us, Franz Botha was on that side of the vehicle. He got one in the arse, and they took out the coil and a couple of other bits in the engine, so the Jeep was US. Anyway, we were the raiding squad. I mean, I was on the machine gun at the back, but the other 4 guys that went into the house were on our vehicle with Pierce and 3 others. Josh had been told. I mean, this story went round and round so many times, and the guys worked so hard and took so many risks, and we missed the targets every single time. It's not a coincidence. There was a mole deep in there. Everyone says Ken Flower. Maybe he was one of them, but I think there was someone else as well. They found out about too much of our stuff. It was just not coincidence. Anyway, so we didn't know until we blooming wrapped the place up, and the guys went in, and they took a bit of fire from inside the house. Barry Perry was shot in the bum. So this is another story. C Squadron got 2 bum shots on one op. So the other 2 squadrons were saying, well, which way were you guys facing when you took this fire? And it went around a big joke. So, yeah. We cleaned up all the guards, and Josh wasn't there. Someone told him. Anyway, at the same time, I think Rich Stannard and a couple of others were sorting out an arms cache in the city, and they were very successful. And in the middle of all this mayhem, the Zambian army, the police, nobody interfered with us. Probably, it was better for everyone that way. And we headed off, dumped our vehicle. Well, we couldn't do anything. We left it outside, took all the stuff off it, and distributed the troops onto other vehicles. And then headed south. But now this whole thing had taken longer than estimated, and the sun starts coming up, and we're waiting for, I can't remember what those Russian aircraft were they used. Not the MiGs, although they did have MiG-17s. It was another thing called... Yeah, whatever. Anyway, we were waiting for these things to come looking for us. And the story goes, I haven't had it verified firsthand, but I'll tell it anyway. We had a ComOps DAC up, which was a technique we'd apparently learned from the Israelis. You have air command, you have a command group in the sky all the time that can chat to everyone on the ground and coordinate and just be generally useful. Anyway, they heard the Zambians talking to each other, and there was a command to the extent of we need the Kafui road checked, and the pilot, yeah, because they'd scrambled 2 aircraft or 4 aircraft or something, and the pilot said, "It's not my job." So this went around in 5 seconds. It's not my job. I mean, we could have been in deep poo if they'd revved us. We had MAGs, no other air to ground to air defense at all. So I mean, we're just so lucky.
And no air cover.
Well, I'm sure we could have. They wouldn't have embarked on an operation like that without doing homework. So there were hunters up there that would have helped us, I'm sure, or available to help us. But we never needed them. And got back to the ferry and came back home, and that was the end of that chapter. But we hadn't got Fat Man. And in the press, the next day or the couple of days afterwards, Joshua said, "I was there, but I got out through the toilet window." So immediately General Walls quipped, "Well, that's probably why the house is so fucked up." Yeah. Anyway, but the next op of note was another C Squadron op. I don't know how we scored 2 in a row, to visit Zipper HQ in Lusaka, in the suburbs. Also more seriously dangerous and very good work by all the people that had done recce's. I mean, we were just the blooming cannon fodder that went in to try and erase the problem. You know, this time we went in by choppers, and it was first light, and they found the house straight away. Got to remember, for the younger guys, we didn't have GPS. This was all compass and maps reading, and the commanders, our commanders, talking to the boss man of the Blues. They were shit hot. I mean, that map reading. And we had to do it as well. There was no GPS, just set the thing and end up at position B. You had to work out how to get there. Nighttime marches were fun, but I'm getting off the topic now. Anyway, the HQ building, same story. Nobody important was inside. All the guys that were left to look after the place had another bad day of it. And they decided to do this blow everyone up in the room thing. We hadn't learnt too much or weren't too keen on the shock grenade thing that the regiment had used in the UK. So we had this bloody great bunker bomb, 1 kilogram of HE. And they had underestimated or overestimated the strength of the building, which they thought maybe clay brick, but it was just concrete breeze block. So Captain Pierce threw this monster bomb in, and the wall promptly flattened him. Well, it's just lucky that there was no one else behind the wall, because they would have also been flattened. So there was our OC with his boots sticking out from under the wall, second in command takeover. Andy Schultz got one in the back. I'm not sure whether it was from ricochets or enemy fire. Anyway, so we got out of there, and there was one guy, or I don't know whether it was a person or documents, because the place was chock-a-block with documents. So I think the escape and evasion plan that the guys that were in there had done was just before we got there. But they found good kit, which led on to Opchikri, which was all the arms dumps outside Lusaka. Not that far outside, but we went back again to sort that out a couple of weeks later. And I mean, Zipra was totally prepped for classical war. They had everything there, any type of bloody ordnance you care to wish for, including SAM missiles, which once we tried to blow them, well, we did blow them up, but a whole lot of boxes were opened, and a lot of SAMs were not badly damaged enough, and the fuses went or whatever. They were initiated, and so they started screaming off through the bush in all directions. And then they saw, oh, there's a hot thing. So they all headed up to the sun. They went up to the sun, up to the sun. It was quite fun to watch, but while they were coming through the bush, it was a little unnerving.
Stan, I'm not sure which one comes next, really, but Op Uric, I think you were involved down there.
Yeah, that was a big one, eh? They had planned, I think, something like 5 or 6 bridges that they were going to blow to inhibit movement that Frelimo was enabling for our friends Zanla. And then Mapai, which was a big staging point for the Zanla troops before coming into the Russian front. And it was one of the few ops that we really trained for. They had an operational break, and we could give it a go and practice stuff and house clearing and all sorts of things. It was good to practice properly before a big op, because often we never had the time. I mean, talk to the RLI guys. You know, they just got on the chopper and they said, our target's over there, go for it. At least we were a little bit more strategic. We had that luxury. Anyway, so Uric, they'd found this big... it used to sit in the middle of a swamp in the wet season, but it was a circle of trees with sort of flat ground in the middle, which they found ideal as an admin base, because then we could do a perimeter guard and put all our ammo, drums, water, wounded, whatever in the middle, without being hassled, because outside of this island was just kilometers of flat stuff, so we could see anybody coming for ages. Yeah, so then the weather came in, and we had to sit there for, I think, 3 days before it was good enough to actually go and do stuff. And in that time, the Freds had heard all this air movement, and they said, better we go and have a look over there. They chose, any day would have been a bad day, but in the middle of the day with good light, they walked into the corner where the D Squadron guys and RLI sort of had a corner. And I think they got 23 out of 24. But they managed to get off a few rounds, and the RLI OC, I think, took one in the leg. Fondel, perhaps? Yeah, we heard him yelling on the radio. We were on the other side of all this, so we were just sipping our tea and listening to this lot happen on the radio. And it was all over, 23 out of 24. I can't remember whether it was that afternoon that we went to do the bridges or the following day. Maybe it was the same afternoon. Anyway, I was on Barragem Bridge, part of the DEMS team, being the newly trained DEMS Boffin. It was a railroad junction bridge, but it was also a dam for an irrigation system. They had built a dam underneath the wall, underneath the road. So we arrived, and there was a heavy presence on either side of the bridge. The guys sorted that out, and both ends had a big blimming 23 mil multi-barrel, double barrel. So, yeah, the assault group sorted out both ends of the bridge, and then we arrived, and they said, carry on with your demolitions. So we carried on, and we'd practiced this climbing under the bridge and working with wonder glue that came from our friends further south. So I just carried on with my job, and meanwhile there was all sorts of excitement going on both sides. The Mapai side especially, where I think Andy Amos was hit in the knee, and Dick Paxton came in to sort him out, to get him out. But for some reason, he flew down the railway line, and the guys were south of the railway line, and the village was north of the railway line. Anyway, the 7 and 8 Squadron, they didn't mind. They took huge risks all the time. So the version of risk, how risky was it? He had a Kazovac, he was going to get him out. Anyway, there was a Fred on the ball, and he chucked a blimming RPG-7 into that chopper. And it came onto the left-hand side, so the tech was history straight away. A guy called Wessons, I think. Wesson. Anyway, Dick was still in the front, and the thing crashed. It was quite low to the ground, so it didn't explode straight away, all that started burning. And the late Mike Smith rushed up and managed to pull him out. That was all happening while we were busy sticking things under the bridge. And then I remember Barrett on the bridge. He came to see, and he was looking at his watch and saying, guys, we're running out of time here. It's always like that, eh? So we tied up and connected up the cordite ring main and departed. And while we were departing, this huge bang, a mushroom cloud in the sky, and we said, yes, that's it. The rail bridge, which I'd been working on, of course, was history, but the road bridge wasn't completely destroyed, and it was to some extent usable. But anyway, so that was Barragem. And then we came back to the same admin base in the middle of the swamp, the X-swamp, and the following morning we left for Mapai.
And back into that attack.
Yeah, no, Mapai was a separate exercise with everyone. All the squadrons and the RLI and Reckies, everyone was involved in sorting Mapai out. Well, we had, I think, 14 SAF Pumas, all flying in a line towards this place. And some very lucky, very stupid, and or very brave chap with an RPG-7, because there were arms dumps on the outskirts of Mapai. And he was in one of them. And he saw this cataclysm of blooming helicopters coming towards him and just let off a rocket. And I think he was probably aiming for the first one and hit the third one or something. Anyway, it hit one of the Pumas and it went down. We didn't have time to sort. At that stage, we flew on to Mapai and carried on with the attack. Some RLI guys went there later in the day, and they said to everyone on board KIA, they were cooked to cinders. Anyway, so we were on the ground in Mapai. These guys were ready for us, in their trenches, well armed. We arrived, who dares wins infantry. Oops. Yeah, so this flak curtain of fire was coming out at us, and the guys went in and into a couple of trenches and back again and in again, and then the next one. We were making heavy weather of it, and then calling in the blues again and again, please drop some more bombs on these people, which they did. I mean, one stage we were so close to the bombs. I mean, the grass and everything was flattening towards us, and we were just making like postage stamps on the ground. Huge noise. And we only found out later, huge damage as well. I mean, they were just bombing the crap out of those people. But the guys in the trenches hadn't been hit, and they kept up the resistance. So, ground commander, I think it was the twice again, had to make a call there. He said, are we going to risk the certainty of more casualties for an uncertain goal? After having already lost 17 guys in the morning. And I don't know whether it was his decision or Comop's. They said, no, you guys are out of there. So we trekked off for about 4 Ks, I think, to a suitable landing zone. And that was the end of Mapai. Stories we heard subsequently, they were on the verge of surrender and they didn't want any more. You never know these things. And I mean, the guys had to make a decision at the time, and they made the best one with the information available. We would love to have taken Mapai, but not for another 10 dead guys. Really, that was it.
Stan, your next bridge operation was Chambeshi, up far northern.
The big one.
Far northern Zambia. Quite a story. You went in on the initial.
Yeah, well, we had to recce the place first. I mean, they'd taken about 7 million aerial photos, which were well interpreted and well read by our boffins. They were very good at reading these things. But I never realized, now in this day and age, again, you think satellite pics and you get, what's the clarity of the picture called? The resolution. Resolution, you can just blow it up until you can read a newspaper from outer space or something. Those aerial pics were damn good, even since the Second World War. And you can blow them up and find out all sorts of things. And our team, I can't remember, they were based at New Serum, I think. Somewhere, anyway. They were blooming expert at this thing. And they said, okay, not only are guys training in Tanzania, but we need to rattle the whole Zambian cage for looking after them. And this is one way we can do it. Taking out the Tanzam, which was a main route up north into Tanzania, originally built by the Chinese, I think, in the 60s. So it was quite a long way from home, which was a problem. Getting there, yeah, problems. Anyway, so they said, yep, we're going to have a look. So I was with the 4-man team that free fell in there to check it out and do measurements of the bridge to see, if indeed it was possible. Yeah, in the DC-10, 7. Yeah, this big black thing with no markings that he used to bust sanctions with all over the place. And we went in. Yeah, well, the first time we went in, the dispatcher couldn't properly see the river or the bend in the river which we were going to land just north of. So we went lower and lower, and then we still couldn't see. And he said, it's different dropping the guys 20 k's from a 5-force base, but when you're dropping them 400 k's across the border, you need to know that it's the right place. So we turned around and came home, which, as it turned out, gave us a lot of time to brush up on stuff before the next moon phase. That you can never train enough for these things, especially when you're doing one-offs. Anyway, we had a lot of time then to practice jumping, pushing stuff out of aircraft at night, RVing at Darwindale Dam, the free-fall team and the main team. We had time to do all that, which was really good. It gives you a sort of solid feeling when you're jumping out into that roaring blackness at 12,000 feet or whatever it was. Actually, we came lower than that. So the day came and we jumped into the roaring blackness, and I managed to pick up the flashing lights of my 3 team members, but the flashing lights of the box with the canoes and the spare radio and flashing, and then there was great darkness. Anyway, so we got down onto the ground and collected ourselves, and we swept around and around and around for this box. And then we swept even further around and around in this quite dense forest. It wasn't really ugly Jesse bush country like the valley, but thick bush. I mean, Zambia, the forests are much bigger than ours. I remember the guys at school, just on a little red herring. We had a lot of Zambians because our education system was so good. Anyway, the farmers up there. But first of all, I must start in the Free State. If you could get 10 tons of, I think it was a hectare, not an acre, surely, 10 tons of a hectare, you were in a 10-ton club, which was a hell of a thing. You are now a pucker farmer in the Free State. In Zambia, if you couldn't get 10 tons, you weren't in the club, because you just look at the ground and stuff grows. Anyway, that was the bush. Jeez. And tree landing, no option. It will be a tree landing. Yeah. Anyway, so there we are sitting, and the twice is on the radio saying, we can't find this box, so, we'll have another look tomorrow with the light. And there was our spare radio as well, which is a good thing to have when you're 500 k's from home. Anyway, we did the circle bigger and bigger and bigger the next day, and he said, well, actually, we can't spend too much time looking for this stuff, because you never know who's heard the aircraft or who we're going to bump into. You've got to get on with it. Anyway, so we laughed the box off. And he said, chaps, we're now walking to site. Which, as it turned out, was unfortunate, because we would have got a measure of the strength of the river. We walked up there, we didn't know how strong that bloody river was until the main group arrived, and then it was the first time in the water, and this thing's just roaring in our faces. Anyway, so we got up there, did our recce.
So you actually find the bridge?
Yeah, no, I mean, you just carry on until you get to the bridge. And very underpopulated.
And you get in the water and go and check the structures.
Yeah. We said, okay, Paul French was the radio man. We said, here's our heavy kit. You look after that. 500 k's from home on my own. No, fine. Oh, you just sit there, and we'll go and have a look at the bridge. The twice had a silenced pistol. I had a very sharp knife, and I don't know what Phil Cook had, but he had something probably. So we set off to do this recce. Eesh.
Swimming down the river?
No, from the side of the bridge. We just went underneath. But then get to the big pillar in the middle, and how are we going to tell how deep it is? So the twice looks at me. I said, okay, I know how are we going to find out how deep it is. In the middle of the bloody night, in, I don't know, my PT shorts or something. And then I feel, oh, okay, there's the plinth. Okay, that's about 18 inches something. Came up again, and we stored all this information to send back to the DEMS team to see if our plan A was still good. So that was uneventful, eh? And then
so you got the end back, your radio's working, you send the information back.
Yeah, no, not on the spot. I mean, we had to clear out of there first, because there was a lot more action there than where we had come from. It was so underpopulated. But obviously the aerial photo guys had done their homework, so we didn't bump into anybody at all. And we went back to where they were going to drop the main team, and sent back the messages and the information and whatever, and they tweaked the Dems plan. And then the main team came and joined us. They were dropped from SAF C-130. Another 12 guys, or 16, I can't remember. 12 only, I think. Anyway, they came with more boats and a Zodiac and all the explosives. Hell of a thing, in the middle of a Zamboon jungle, 500 k's. Anyway, we'd practiced all this, and everybody knew their job, and everything was allocated to vessels, and we pushed off up the river. And then they said, yes, and this river, especially the little blooming rubber duck with its, I'm sure it wasn't even a 10 horsepower. They said, no, you're just putting along the river, it's fine, you don't need a big engine, and anyway, they make a lot of noise. And we'd see this blooming land feature there. It was a big miombo tree or something. And then 5 minutes later, it's like, I'm sure that's the same tree that I'm looking at now, because it had a branch going this way. We realized only after 2 days, guys, it's going to take us all year to get upstream with this lot. So the plan was made. They phoned the boffins back and they said, how can we still make this thing work with less weight? They said, charge 3 in the river. And then the rubber duck made better going of it, but the guys in the canoes were still battling somewhat. Same thing again. I think it took us 3 days to get back up to the bridge, overnighting in thick bush. The only almost upset we had was hunters burning the bush. It was October, dry season. So they just burn everything, and see whatever comes out the other side, they kill and eat. And we were sort of in the way of this burning. I think one hunter didn't go home. Anyway, we weren't compromised. And the next night we arrived at the bridge and carried on with our placing of demolitions. By now, all this going down to check had been done, so I just lowered my stuff on a string off the side of the boat, and then connected the Cortex up to the ringmain, and the bridge guys were doing the same. They had one charge less though, which was evident with the aerial photos they took afterwards. The road bridge wasn't completely destroyed because we couldn't work plan A. Funnily enough, one of the vehicles that we stopped there was full of blooming ammonium nitrate fertilizer. We only thought about it.
Okay, so you guys have got a demolitions party down below.
Yeah.
Guys
well, we had guys monitoring, but they weren't going to stop anybody. I mean, we were just busy underneath. We couldn't stop traffic, except we needed a vehicle to get out with.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
So you lay the charges. We've got.
Yeah. And then we stopped an unfortunate truck driver. Some English chaps, actually. They were just freight drivers based in Zambia, going up and down with a big truck, making a killing.
This is to get out now.
Yeah. What is your plan A for Egress? No, we're just going to borrow a vehicle. Okay. So we just borrowed a vehicle, but one they stopped and didn't use was this blooming truckload of ammonium nitrate. And the Dems boffins amongst us, I think diesel, ammonium nitrate, a couple of boosters, we can blow this bridge to Kingdom Come. But the boss man is trying to coordinate everything. Time is ticking by. There are many factors he's got to bear in mind. And now we start pissing around with ammonium nitrate on a kabanga exercise in the middle of the night. He said, no, we've done the scientific thing. Let's get the hell out of here.
So now you hijacked the vehicle.
Yeah.
With
Two guys, two brothers, I think they were, or cousins, and one of them had a son. He was a little 11 or 12-year-old. Anyway, so I said, you guys are coming on a ride with us. I said, Yeah. I'm trying to remember if it was two. No, it was one vehicle. And then we headed off south towards the Luangwa Park. All blackened up, sitting on top of this thing. No incidents at all. And it was a couple of 100 k's on the road, if I remember well. And then we branched east into the reserve and ended up in the middle of Luangwa the following morning. But on the way down, this is another thing. I can't remember how long they'd set the fuses. Whether it was the traditional burning fuse or on a timer. Anyway, in the middle of the night, this huge orange mushroom spread up behind us and lit the whole sky. And of course, because we're so far away now, you hear nothing until some seconds later, and then this boom, boom. I said, okay, that's Cheerio, Chambeshi. The rail bridge was Cheerio. The road bridge was not completely Cheerio, but the message was certainly sent to the Zambian leaders that their sponsoring of the freedom movements was not good for their health. And perhaps they should encourage them to attend. Oh, we weren't even talking about peace talks then. That was before all of that. Anyway, so the presence of the struggle heroes in Zambia was not appreciated after that. Yeah.
Stan, getting out, helicopters found you.
Yeah, we were now a long way south of the bridge, in the middle of the Luangwa Game Reserve somewhere. And the Bells, which had a much better range than the Allos, came from just the other side of the Zambezi to pick us up. And I think they dropped fuel on the way as well, just in case we had to refuel once. We flew all the way back home, and that was Chambeshi.
With the white captives.
Yeah, I can't remember how that was played, because it was all supposed to be Zambian dissidents or something that had done this. But I mean, really, it was pretty obvious who'd done it. And they said, these poor oaks, man, at least no one's hurt. I'm sorry for their truck, which was written off and probably not claimable for. Anyway, they were repatriated somehow or other. I can't remember how. I didn't follow it closely. We were full of crap young men, all those peripherals. Somebody can sort it, That's what the blooming base wallers are for. Anyway, they survived the experience and didn't have anything bad to say about us, except the vehicle was a shame.
Stan, not long after that, back to Zambia, north of Siavonga, up Tepid, which was...
Yes, the misnomer of note, op Tepid my ass, was the least tepid op I was ever on. Jesus. Anyway, so it was November and they still had no rain up there. It was absolutely raging hot, and they'd spotted movement, clearings, all sorts of things on top of this ridge. It was called the ridge, actually, afterwards. And Zipra, not Bakshi operators. These oaks were classically trained. When we got there afterwards, there were two ridges that were all trenched up, anti-aircraft up, supporting fire, radios, field telephones, everything. These were no arbitrary gooks. Jeez. Anyway, we were soon to find out. They sent a bunch of us. Again, I don't know whether it was 12 or 16, 3 or 4 sticks, maybe 16 of us. They said, okay, get in there and find out what's going on. The first day we went in and we were chilling and ambushed a bunch of guys coming through. There were no survivors, so we couldn't do any interrogation. But they had obviously heard this, and they didn't have their guys coming back to base. They said, right, they're hostile south of us, go and sort. And then we were getting closer in the middle of the night, and we got ambushed. A shitload of incoming. And John McLaurin, one of our English chaps was hit in the back, I think. Kidney damage. Anyway, we had to stay put because he was really serious. But they couldn't get us out. We had to just stay put. But these blimming gooks, they didn't move, hey? This chap was crying out in pain, and then when he was on the morphine, he was crying out about all sorts of funny things he was dreaming of. And every time he made a noise, this blimming sheet of red tracer, green tracer, everything came over us. And we were swapping pleasantries in such fashion for most of the night. And then the following day, John hadn't made it. I think his he'd bled out internally. And they said, okay, well, you guys are in the area. I think we'll just hopscotch you straight onto the camp, and then you can have a real good look. So, okay. They hopscotched us to the southern end of this ridge. Yes. And then the fun started. These guys, I mean, they said someone had taken a tactical blimming look at that thing and said, if the enemy comes from there, we need to hit it from such and such and such positions. They had it all sussed. As we popped our head over the ridge, Captain Cook was in, Lieutenant Cook, Bandit we called him, was in front. And he got clipped. Where? In the arse. Third arse entry for C Squadron. Wasn't good for morale. And then he reversed back down quickly. I think I was his radio man or his gunner or something. And he did this dramatic sort of left flanking. And down on the left flank was old man Andy. He was dreadfully old, about 32, I think. Anyway, he'd been in the Brit SAS, and he certainly wasn't lacking in guts or aggression. And you just saw this curtain of dust and shrapnel, tracer coming over the ridge, because they knew exactly where we were. And he was a call sign, zero, only getting you twos. He wasn't going anywhere, otherwise there would have been 4-0 straight away. So we sat there and wondered, and now? I said, well, you guys aren't getting any further on this. Best you come back. At least Captain Mac, Major Mac eventually, the late Mackenzie, had been flying over in a Lynx, and they caught a whole lot of shrapnel as well, which buggered up their undercarriage, and they had to belly land at FAF2 in Kariba. Anyway, he took a good look and made notes and said, okay, you guys get out of there. We'll have a think about this and get some more energy on it. So he crash landed back at FAF, and we had to run through the bush because the amount of anti-aircraft fire that was brought to bear, the choppers said, we'd help you out, but just a little bit further south, like even a bit further south than that. So we were smashing through the bush with these huge Bergens in 42-degree bloody heat. And these guys jumped out of their trenches and started following us. We could hear them shouting to each other. And we heard searching fire with the mortars, 1, 2, 3, 100 meters further, 1, 2, 3. They were awesome. So the tactical withdrawal, that speed increased in speed. Some of the guys, I think 2 or 3, got heat fatigue. So then we couldn't leave them. We couldn't stop. We just relieved them of the burdens. And guess who got the burdens? The guys that didn't have heat fatigue. So we were now even more heavily burdened, charging through the bush, tactically withdrawing until we got to a landing zone and whipped back to Kariba. And they said, okay, we need a lot more ordnance and feet on the ground for this target. So I think one of the RLI commandos was called off R&R. They said, you thought you were going on R&R? Well, we're going to Kariba, but it's not going to be R&R. They got, I can't remember if it was all of squadron or two of the squadrons. Anyway, a whole bunch of us. And they said, right, now we're going to sort this ridge out. The RLI, who were better than us actually at sweeping and instinctive shooting and all that, they said, okay, they're going to just sweep. And we said, hey, we'll be watching. So they swept and ran into exactly the same stuff that we ran into. And the blues were dropping us whatever they could drop on them. couldn't dislodge these buggers, eh? Yo. My good friend, Chisel Carpenter, I can't remember what he did, but something heroic. He got the BCR that day. They lost one man or two men. And the anti-aircraft fire was horrendous because it was coordinated. It wasn't just gunner by gunner. They were talking to each other, saying the choppers are coming in from the southeast. Here's the flak curtain. So the Blues tried their best, but they couldn't really help us that much, eh? And that night, they'd had such a rev, the Zipper, I mean, that they decided to move camp, but not just scuttling into the bush. They did a column withdrawal, and they took some of the heavy weapons with them. Still fully disciplined, and the brass at Kariba looked at the map, and they said, okay, we've got stops here, 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 here. What about that spot there? I said, oops. So they just scraped a call sign together as quickly as they could, took the RLI int officer with bottle washers and sick, lame and lazy, said, okay, here's 12 Oaks, get out there and be ready. So he was dropped, and guess where the gooks came? Through that very spot. Jeez. Anyway, the man on the ground, he made the call, and after having come up against these guys, I don't blame him. His call was, we're not going to engage. Otherwise, we're going to be wiped out. These people, they do sweep lines. There are bloody hundreds of them walking past this position. They're super aggressive. And here I am with a bunch of guys I've never worked with before. Some are even bottle washers. And he just said, the plus minus of this situation is I can lose half my men for what? Anyway, so they got out. And he took serious flack after that as a result of not engaging them. But, that's how it goes. It was his decision. And personally, I think I would have made the same one. But you don't know until you're there. Eh? Anyway, the brass was not impressed with him. And he took a lot of flack on that account. That was the end of Op Uric, eh? I mean, where were we? Tepid, the dreaded Tepid. The Ridge, we never displaced them. Well, temporarily. But they were disciplined, tough, bloody reactionary troops. Not anything the like of which we'd come up against before.
Stan, let's fast forward now. Lancaster House, ceasefire, op courts, op hectic. How did it all end for you?
Well, the ceasefire happened at the end of 79. And they said, what are we going to do? And obviously there are going to be elections, and they were getting their act together for that. And of course, the potential for upsets was huge. How are we going to do this? All the terrorists, freedom fighters, all the freedom fighters must come into assembly points so that there'll be no more hostilities. Well, of course, half the gooks said, we've got arms caches everywhere. Just send a whole lot of young guys in with AK-47s or old rusty SKSs. They'd take the numbers, count the number of weapons, say, that's most of them. The elections can carry on. Well, meanwhile, half of them were still in the bush, scaring the voters, saying, you know who you're going to vote for, ne? Yeah. And, well, they just put us all on courses and stuff as close to Harare as possible, just for in case. I was on a diving course when they did the elections, which was sometime in March, middle of March, beginning of March. Anyway, and they'd come up with this thing, this master plan. Maybe we can squash the whole Gook army in a day. They're all inverted commas in these assembly points. We know where the HQ was because they'd been given premises at the University of Rhodesia, and we can pretty much nail these oaks down. That was the naive optimism of the moment. Anyway, so we were tasked to take out the leader group at the University of Rhodesia, and we surrounded the place. We practiced on tanks and whatever. The tanks is another story. how we got these things. Anyway, there we were with tanks, waiting for the day the election results were announced, and it was just such a walkover. You know, another thing, people say General Walls gave us away. You know, he's in a hell of a position. Do you want cataclysm or an end which is manageable? You know, and they said, okay, Mugabe won by such a huge margin because of all his bloody terror tactics. What are you going to do? Now kill all the troops, and then what is the rest of the world going to say? So the rest of the world's been kicking us around for years. What do we care? Anyway, that was it. They canned it. So we all stood down, and that was the end of it. I'm not sure myself how that day would have gone. You know, the casualties would have been absolutely horrendous, and not only on one side. And were we capable of handling those CAS for starters, but the collateral damage would have been virtually unrecoverable. And of course, South Africa at that stage, they were fully looking after their own interests. I mean, they lent us aircraft and a couple of recce's and all this sort of stuff. But they had their own interests at heart, which is understandable for any nation. And they would have dropped us like a bloody hotcake, you know, after that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And they were the bullets and the petrol. Without those two, there was no more war.
True, Stan. I just want to, I know it doesn't really fall within the subject of Rhodesia, but while I've got you, I want you to talk about it, because we talked about it in the book Men of War, and it's just a fascinating story. So after the war, you go back to university. You're supposed to be at University of Cape Town, Moscow, on the hill, becoming a good left winger, and suddenly you pop off to the Seychelles. Just
yeah. Well, the blooming brief history. The Seychelles had been the democratically elected government of the Seychelles had been overthrown in 1977 by a guy called Albert Rene, who at that stage I think was the prime minister. Anyway, he wasn't happy with the situation, and he wanted Marxism, and he wanted it now. So he organized a coup with Tanzanian bully boys, and 2 innocents were killed. People conveniently forget that. You know, we were giving him his own medicine. And yeah, anyway, so a bunch of Seychellois and possibly South African business stroke tourist interests, maybe strategic as well, because it's the middle of the blooming Red Sea, good place for SA to have listening watch, wanted to sponsor a return round with old Rene. And they tried a couple of folk that turned it down, and they ended up with old Mad Mike Hoare, who was 20 years past his best, done great things in the Congo, but I mean that was 303 guys that were all drugged up. Now we're against reasonably well-trained chaps with modern common turn weapons. So they offered Mike whatever they offered him, and they said, okay, get a team together and go and sort out Albert Rene. And he said, okay, we'll give this a go. And he started recruiting a whole bunch of guys. And I was called by my friend Joppy, who just finished his recce's. And of course, Durban was where they were all, a lot of them were still milling around, wondering what to do now. And their center of gravity being the Bluff. And he said, no, there's work of a military nature, and it's going to pay 10 grand. I mean, you have to multiply that into modern figures. It's probably close to $1 million of today's money. Today's rand, anyway.
And you're a poor university student?
Well, yes, poor university student. And, you know, one of these Zimbos that was allowed 50 rand a month or something, unless you did fly-by-night work instead of maths, biology, and chemistry. Oh. So, but I mean, the chemistry was, here's this bloody bully who got in by a coup. I've got no problems with kicking his ass. You know, we were told we were right-wing terrorists, and you know, the poor Seychelles war, and Mr. Rene in particular. You know, take your sobbing somewhere else. He needed his ass kicked, and so there was no problem with motivation. But one thing I am very embarrassed about, I should say, was the lack of looking into the planning. I mean, we planned everything in the squadron, down to the last bloody bullet, probably. And there was, we didn't ask any of the pertinent questions. You just caught up in this wave of enthusiasm, surrounded by a lot of good operators, which made a big difference. And if they think it's fine, then it must be fine. And he was looking at me thinking exactly the same thing. What about prisoners? What about backup? They say the Kenyans are going to support this thing. What? From Kenya? Really? Oh, jeez. And ammo. We said, no, we're going to have rockets and grenades and stuff that are going to go in by yacht. Then the night before, they said, there's no yacht because they've been checking boats in the harbour. So we're taking our own stuff in. You could have heard a pin drop in that place. Two guys immediately said, that's it. We all should have said immediately, that's it. But the same thing, that herd instinct. You know, you're looking at the hard operators and you say, no, we've been through a lot of shit before. I mean, come on, can't be that bad. They say it's a holiday island with a bunch of blooming half-trained Tanzanians. So there we went.
So off you go with AKs.
AK-47s and 2 magazines, 60 rounds for a coup.
In your carry-on bag.
In our bags. And funnily enough, these bags had all been prepped already. The K-light had been cut out and everything. It wasn't a decision that happened overnight. They'd led us down the garden path with this blooming yacht with heavy weapons story. And only 2 guys had the gumption to say, that is it, I'm out of here. Yeah. Anyway, so we flew into this. Yeah, it was the first charter, the first Air Swazi charter to the Seychelles. We had the whole aircraft, so nothing was even checked. They just chucked the stuff in the hold and headed off for Seychelles, well, via the Comores.
You land at...
We landed at Comores. Somebody got on or somebody got off. And of course, the armchair experts will all have it that, oh no, it was that was the guy that was informing all the Seychelles while, you know, that we were on the way. A lot of crap. They weren't expecting us. Anyway, so we get there on the ground. Everyone's now less humorous and less full of wit and sweating like buggery, as you do in a tropical climate and with this adrenaline pumping. An aircraft full of guys, 3/4 of which were young men, lean, young, aggressive men. That just something wasn't holiday about this group of people. If I was a customs officer, my hair would have been up like a bloody dog. Anyway, customs officer had the same impression, and he said, I have to check some of this kit at least. And the bags were so poorly put together, you know, scratch, 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 rip, rip, rip. Here, all of a sudden, is this long foresight looking at him, saying, children's toys? Yeah.
Because you were supposed to be a charitable rugby.
Well, the Ancient Order of Frothblowers was a group that was started after the First War, and they were guys that did charitable things. You know, they collected money and gave to orphans and visited underprivileged. And anyway, so we took on this title, or Mike Horwood found it somewhere, the Venerable Order of Frothblowers, because they yeah, well, that was one of them. I mean, we were going to visit the brewery and the topless beaches and all sorts of things. Yeah, I thought, but the only beach I visited was, well, I didn't even get onto the beach, actually. Didn't get further than the airport. Yeah. It was not our finest hour.
So customs...
And everyone that wasn't there has a good chuckle, and I'm not allowed to say anything, and I probably wouldn't.
Stan, so the weapons found in a bag, then what happened?
Phew. By now, one of the guys that was through already realized this is going to kick off. Well, he actually kicked it off, but he said, what do we do now? I mean, the customs chap is taking, I think it was Kevin Beck, one of the recce guys, to the office to phone Victoria and get the cops down and everything, and we said, oh, this is no good. So the guy had assembled his weapon already, and he put one round through this customs officer's shoulder. But he hadn't done, there's a combat expression for, the backdrop. I can't remember it now. The round went straight through his shoulder into Johan Fritz's chest. And Johan didn't make it. But now we're sitting with this, okay, what now? And Mike Hoare didn't have a plan. He said, okay, well, we must get down to the southern end of the airstrip, because that's where the army base is, and we can just sort of break in there and get weapons and stuff. It was all pretty straightforward. So, a whole bunch of guys. Yeah, no, I'd realized that it was going down as well. So they were the hotel employee or the blooming mini combi driver was diligently putting our kit on top of the vehicle. And then I said, no, it's getting off again, because the guys want to access their hardware, And he was like, and then, of course, the first bang, he was into the bush like mobile swastika. Yeah.
So now the shooting starts.
Well, there was just that one round. The press would have it. We were all charging around, spraying everything with ammo. First of all, at what would we have shot? And secondly, when you've only got 60, you don't spray anything anywhere. So they said, okay, well, let's have a call sign for the bottom of the runway. Hands up, fucking you and you. And they all bailed into the combi and went down to see what additional ordnance they could get. The camp at the bottom of the runway. Yeah. So they arrived there and said, excuse me, would you guys mind opening the gates? And the four guys, I think there were four of them, according to legend, said, I don't think so. We're not opening for anyone. And also, here's something for you to think about. Pop, 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 pop. They hit Charlie Dukes in the arm. They hit blooming Saluso, who ended up in jail there. Aubrey Brooks. They hit Aubrey Brooks in the thigh. That was quite a bad wound. And that was it. They didn't get further than that with their blooming 60 rounds. They decided, okay, there's only, for whatever there were, 6 or 7 of them, one badly wounded guy, and Charlie sort of leaking quite a bit. I said, okay, well, clearly we're not going to get in here. So let's go back and join the others. One little thing I forgot to mention was that Hoare was not in the combi. He decided to join the team in his car that he'd hired, or that had been hired for him, in which was a briefcase with all our bloody details in it. Talk about OPSEC. So the Seychelles War had that. They knew everybody that was involved in this thing. So the guys that stayed there trying to become tourists again, I mean, the cover was blown on them already. Jeez. Ah. So then the guys come back to the airport. What now? Not too sure. Colonel Mad Mike, any ideas? No ideas from him. So the senior guys of ours, the ex-Zimbies and the ex-Recce boys, were together and trying to make whatever plan they could make, just to bunker down or get ready, because surely the shit was going to hit the fan. Certainly the next morning, if not during the night. So I was on the roadblock from Victoria to the north. We stopped a few vehicles and gathered up all these people and sent them into the holding centre. One vehicle we stopped, unfortunately, we didn't realize, contained the commander of the aforementioned barracks at the southern end. I don't know what help he could have or would have been, because it was such a cluster. And then the guys at the southern end said, right, we've got to make some show of force. And they rushed out with one of those Russian military vehicles with a 14.5 gun on it. and a machine gun on top of that. That's a small light machine gun, or PKM, whatever. So this thing came charging down the runway and let off a whole lot of rounds at the control tower. I think Vernon Prinsley was in there at the time with the air traffic controller, and the air traffic controller just disappeared into one of those metal rubbish bins, pulled the lid down, and that's where he remained until probably after we'd left. So the guys abandoned the not very hospitable control tower, and then it came around the northern end and started revving us on the other side. 60 rounds of AK against guys in an armored carrier with 14.5 rounds. It can tear a car in half. We weren't evenly matched, so we were making like microbes behind any cover that was available. Quite effectively, I must say. And then they were looking for us, and then went in because the rain had started now. The tropics. The sun had gone down, and it went from bright day to pitch black in about 10 minutes. And the rain came, and this armored vehicle skidded off the road a bit and ended up in the mud and couldn't get out. So 2 of the more courageous fellows rushed up and smeared the window with mud so they couldn't see where they were going. So, okay, well, now we've got 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember, inside here. We need them out, because this would be quite a nice vehicle for us to use, for tomorrow, the big punch-up tomorrow. Anyway, various obscenities were sworn, and attempts at French, and voulez-vous coucher wasn't likely to get these guys out of their tin can. And then one of the guys said, right, time for games is over. Pour some petrol down the barrel of the weapon and light it. And then the top flew open straight away. But this guy, I wasn't watching. He was fidgeting for something, and he had a handgun. I don't know. Anyway, he was dispatched because he was deemed to have been hostile. So there was 1 casualty on each side now, which didn't do the guys that stayed in the island any good in court, obviously. They heard on what was left of the equipment in the control tower that there was an Air India plane coming into land. They said, you realize there's a bit of a situation going on here. The transfer of information I can't remember, but we found out in the subsequent court case that the plane had been short-fueled in Harare because someone had made a bit of extra at the expense of Air India. And this business of you must always have enough fuel to get from wherever your first choice is to the second choice. They didn't have enough. They had to land in the middle of this lot. And by now, the Seychelles War and the Tanzanians were getting very brave with their weapons, tossing mortars and those big 75 recoilless rounds. All sorts of stuff was raining down on us. And one round hit the cabin of the Air Swazi. Their first charter to Seychelles, aeroplane history. There was a direct hit on the cabin. It was the end of the Air Swazi. Yeah, so then this plane has to land. And somehow or other, there was one telephone that was still working. And Mike had managed to get himself together enough to at least make a call and get a hold of somebody in the police or some sort of authoritarian figure. Said, we've got this cigar tube of civvies sitting in the middle of all your fire. We're not firing anything. Best you stop. Otherwise, it's not going to look good. Bits of civvy spread all over your paradise island. And so someone said, okay. So the firing stopped. We had to refuel this thing. And while the refueling process was going on, they said, well, what do you think the outcome of tomorrow will be? Not good. Where do you think this plane's going? Doesn't matter. Get on it. What negotiations followed, I have no idea. And, it was pulled to bits in court without much clarity. Anyway, the bottom line is the plane was commandeered and they were going to fly wherever we wanted to go the captain said the safety of my crew and my passengers is paramount, and after that, whatever. So a bunch of us, or most of us, got back onto the Air India plane, and it was diverted from Mumbai back to Durban, which started another whole saga. But Roger England, who was with us, but he had come in an advance party. So ignorant of the whole bloody operational details which was in the car by the southern barracks. He said, no, I'm just going to go back to being a civvy because I know nothing about you people who came here this afternoon. And, you know, there was fair thinking. But with the information, they rounded them all up. And Aubrey had been so badly wounded that, you know, he'd been on his way back to the airport buildings while they were still trying to chat nicely to the guards, and he'd collapsed and become unconscious, and we couldn't run around in the bush looking for him. Jerry Purin was also lurking in the bush with a bloody broken ankle or something. Yeah, anyway, so we departed, and then that was the end of a very ugly. We lost a guy that we shouldn't have lost, and it was so poorly planned. We're just lucky that so many of us came out of it.
And arrested on arrival in Durban?
Yeah, well, after 4 hours sitting in the plane, we were arrested. As, you know, the balls went round and round and up and down, and the jugglers did their thing. Then we were accused of... we weren't accused of anything at first. We just went to Zonderwater prison where they took statements of all of us, having not informed us of our rights or anything. What rights? You guys just stole an aircraft. So then they got all our stories and let us go, but kept our passports, of course. And then the charges were only laid 2 months later. We went back to Maritzburg High Court, and 4 months later we were all charged, except Charlie, who they said couldn't have made his mind up to get on the aircraft because he was so badly wounded. Everyone in court got up and clapped him out, and then we had to wait for sentence. And Judge James, he just summed it up and he said, I think most of you are reasonably fine men, but you stuffed up big time. 2 people have been killed, not to talk of the expense of all this. The South African High Court for 4.5 months, with a commission to the Seychelles, all, you know, the damage to the aircraft, the insurance business, the tourist industry, to everything. I mean, it was massive. And he said, you can be thankful you're getting the lightest possible sentence of 5 years. If you're guilty of anything under the Act, 5 years minimum. But you're only doing 6 months effective, of which we did 4. And then about 5 other guys got heavier sentences, and they went to real jail in Pretoria.
Yeah. Hell of a story, Stan. Hell of a life.
Yeah. And Albert Bloody Rene remained in true African form the boss of the country for, I think, another quarter of a century. You know, there were free and fair elections, of course, but he just seemed to win every time. It was a funny thing.
As happens in Africa. Stan, thanks a hell of a lot.
It's a pleasure. I hope that some of this is of amusement or interest to those that follow your series.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
And if I've let anyone down with my story, no, I don't think anyone will be let down. Sorry for that.